Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Page Turners Plus. As always, we thank you for joining us on this literary journey throughout the Caribbean. Today, we'll be reflecting on A Different Hurricane by H. Nigel Thomas. To tell you a bit more about this novel and the author, we have Paula.
Thank you, Raul J. Nigel Thomas is a Vincentian writer. A Different Hurricane tells the story of Gordon Wiley, a Vincentian husband, father, and senior civil servant. Gordon lives in Cane Garden with his wife Maureen, who, until she became too ill to work in 2012, was deputy headmistress of Saint Vincent Girls High School. Maureen is growing increasingly helpless, will not go out in public, and will not take visitors. Gordon has a secret which may be linked to Maureen's failing health. A Different Hurricane is a story about the extreme measures gay men in Saint Vincent and the Grenadines adopt to conceal their sexuality. It exposes the unintentional harm caused by the secrecy and the pointlessness of the oppression gay men face in this society. It recounts real instances of violence against gay men in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the callousness of the news reporting around those events. Although this is a work of fiction, it names real names, identifying by their government names living politicians and Christian fundamentalist anti LGBTQ activists who, being devoid of empathy, promote malice and stoke hatred towards the queer community.
Thank you very much, Paula. So I think a question that we could ask would be a question that we had throughout the novel. Why wasn't Maureen more angry? I must say I was quite angry for Maureen, but then she just seemed to be, as you said in your synopsis, helpless. In spite of all the circumstances she faced, and from her childhood to her adulthood and her relationship with Gordon, it was almost surprising to see the lack of anger that she had, and it made me wonder whether there's a segment of us, and there is a segment of our society that is just quiet in the face of all the adversities. And I maybe this was the author's way of giving Maureen a voice or some representation. But I was definitely surprised by the lack of anger that she had.
You did see spurts of anger every now and again, and every time I saw this spurt of anger, I was like, "Go!" Of anger, I was like, "Go, girl! You need to be angry. You have every right to be angry." Um, I wondered whether she was fighting with guilt, if she was fighting internally with guilt, because I think she's blameless, but or maybe not blameless. But I don't think she is as blameworthy as she thinks, in terms of how she and Gordon got married, how the circumstances that made them get married. I don't think she's as blameworthy as she thinks she is. So I was wondering whether she was struggling with that guilt, but also she works very hard at being a fair person. That's just her persona. It's very important to her to be fair. And I wonder whether that also figures into, well, I don't think she lacked anger. She didn't express it. And when she felt it, she would talk herself out of it or try to talk herself out of it.
I also thought that it was probably because of that, the guilt that she might have had because of how they ended up getting married because, she essentially tricked him, I guess. But also I think also the fact that she was writing her thoughts down. I think that's one way that she kind of helped to, I guess, process things. And like you said, she was the kind of person who always tried to get see things from different people's point of view and be reasonable, with one very clear exception, though, her relationship with her father. But apart from that, I agree with you, Paul, that she tried to, be fair and reasonable and be a decent person.
Yeah, Roger, that question is the very question I grappled with throughout the entire novel. I just felt that. recurring theme coming up. Where's the anger? Where's the anger? I found that she was so, calm and cool throughout the whole sufferation, as people would say. Um, I listened to what Paul had to say and Francine, and yeah, that backstory about her circumstances around the marriage and the guilt and all that. Still, I don't think that could have justified um, pouring oil on that water, that turbulent water that was, I mean, very turbulent. This is a dramatic thing. You are been given a death sentence, for want of a better term.
No, no, no,
um,
no. HIV is no longer a death
well,
sentence. We must not.
yeah,
We mustn't say
longer.
these
But
things.
let's go back to
They, not
the
in 2012. It wasn't a death sentence either.
it wasn't that straightforward, though, Paul. I
No,
have to say,
it wasn't. It's
yeah,
not a pleasant disease.
yeah,
But at this point, and by 2012, it was only a disease that you had to live with for the
yeah.
rest of your life.
But the author left us wondering with her secondaries, which is what she really supposedly died from. Not. So the author left us wondering if.
That's not but you're giving away the plot.
Well, no, but I'm just saying. I'm not. I'm just saying the author left us wondering if, well, the underlying thing was not that, right? Anyway, let me not give any more spoilers. But yeah, I felt that um unrealistically she was calm, and I couldn't get it. I I hear you. I hear Francine about herself, about Maureen diving into her writing, what I call a journal. The author calls a memoir. But yeah, I get that too. But that could not have been me.
I also wondered about since we're talking about the people's reaction to it, Frida's reaction seemed pretty tame as well. Did anyone else think that?
I noted that, and especially the manner in which she found out.
Right.
It just seemed sort of, and
Anticlimactic.
that might just be the author sort of showing us that, as Paula said, it's no longer a death sentence. And the author did go to lengths to tell us that Frida is trained in science. She's a molecular biologist, so that might just be the author's way of saying, well, this is no longer a thing that you need to freak out about. But I don't know how too many humans who would find out something like that in the way that Frida found out about it,
I agree with
and
you.
just be like,
Just roll
oh, okay.
along.
I agree with you, Roger. And
She
I'm
just
wondering
rolled with
again
the
if the
punches.
author wasn't trying to do some kind of contrast to say, well, all right, Frida grew up in a different type of
Yeah, but she
cultural
learned
mix,
some pretty.
and therefore she's more liberated. She's more. I don't know what was going on there.
Yeah,
But
I agree that she's more modern, she's more liberated, but she learned something that pretty amazing. Amazing isn't the right word. Heavy news about both of her parents, and her reaction just seemed quite tame. Which there wasn't even a reaction actually. Like there was no reaction. It seemed very tame.
Can't we do some creative imagining though?
Oh, sure.
What I'm thinking is Frida has lived with her parents all her life. She has she's noticed that their relationship isn't all that exciting. Neither of them seems particularly excited about the other. So I am thinking Frida could have just had an aha moment
Mhm.
when she found out, you know, the circumstances of her parents' relationship. That's just me being creative. But no, but the novel did say that Frida did ask her, did say to her parents, I told you don't neither of you seems all that excited about the other.
Mhm.
it's
So
Paula,
maybe
yeah. I mean, the creative license is good that you're taking, but it's a nonchalance about the whole thing. Well, almost that to me. It's like, okay, I always thought something was up. Well, this is it. All right, let's move
Right,
on.
let's move on.
It's
Right.
just like, because as Francine says, this is heavy news. This is not. a light matter. This is
Especially, right, especially
it's a
considering the
life changing something,
conversation
right?
that she had with him when when she first found out about Uncle Alan, and he was saying, yes, well, lots of men have to do this and pretend. And she asked him, well, do you know anyone who has done it? And he was like, well, I have some acquaintances that have done it. And then you find out, well, no, and he's actually done it too. I mean, that's shocking, no?
The way Frida reacted
But
to
if
the
you're his,
news, no, I'm saying the way Frida reacted to the news was almost like she found out that her parents told her originally that they met in Kingstown, but it turns out they met in Fancy. That's how the news. That's how Frida reacted. I mean, something like that, you'd be like, "Wow, they lied to me," but I don't really care about that. But what she found out was life changing. You know,
Right. And it wasn't just, I mean, I don't know how, I mean, the book is clearly, we know the book is about obviously homosexual men, right? So she didn't just find out that her dad is gay and married her mom, not just as a what do they call it, as a blind, but he was actively unfaithful. Like, she finds all of this out and nothing.
Not
but
just
then we could
nothing. As for a matter of fact, I think she even took his side. It was almost like, as in, positioning herself. It's almost as if, okay, well, that, all right, understand, and she started to be his advisor
Right.
at certain points. It's like it wasn't just like
Indeed.
right.
nothing. It
She's
was
So let
just
me let
extremely evolved. She's very evolved. Let's just put it that way. She's very
yeah,
evolved.
she belongs to 2030, 2025.
no. I was going to defend Frida's reaction again, but I probably lost all of you. So let me just leave it alone.
But then we could compare and contrast to someone else's reaction. So Beth is markedly more angry than Maureen. I don't think we could avoid spoilers, but without creating spoilers, what do you think accounts for Beth's difference in reaction compared to Maureen's, or even Frida's reaction?
So I guess it's interesting actually because Beth always knew that something was going on and she was fine as long as it was a woman. And then she finds out it's not a woman, and I guess because it's all about, how are people going to look at me, it's their status in the society, you're ruining our reputation, because he's like this well-known doctor. And now, and also the way it came out, it wasn't just, like someone just happening to see something. It was a very, the way that it happened, and everybody knew immediately. It wasn't like just a couple of people found out and then it spread. No, the whole of St. Vincent knew literally the same day. So that would probably explain why she was way more angry than Maureen was.
I was thinking too, its personality. Beth always struck me as more assertive than Maureen. So it could partially be character. I agree with Francine's analysis. It makes perfect sense to me, but it could also be a personality thing.
Absolutely, I think she showed far more aggression, if you want to use that word, than passive Marine. So there was definitely a personality difference there. And yes, Francine, I think she felt that betrayal more so because she suspected something was going on, but not in the way that it was going on. And again, I think the author was introducing something, a dynamic there that actually happens. Because that betrayal seems to be worse than um, your partner cheating with a different sex, right? Than same sex, and I think maybe that's what the author was getting at. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it also, because it was mentioned a couple of times in the book. I mean, even Beth herself was like, "Yeah, it's going to happen eventually," and it's just that kind of unfortunate thing in the Caribbean where women are like, yeah, I know my husband's gonna cheat on me eventually. That's just life. As long as he comes home to me, that's fine. But then when it turns out to be something so completely different, then not expecting that at all.
I think he was giving us a lesson in convenient morality.
Another thing too is that Beth had less reason to think her husband was homosexual than Maureen because they had amazing sex. So her husband was bisexual, I think.
I think so.
One of the
I
things,
think so.
yeah,
Yeah.
one of the things we learned in the novel is the term BS bisexual. I hadn't never heard the term before. I'm not saying it because we're on national television, but BS. You remember that scene where Trevor asks Gordon if he's bisexual or BS bisexual? You don't
Mm-hmm.
remember
I remember
that?
that. Yeah. Mm.
Mm.
That was in this when they were in the bar in Trinidad.
In Trinidad.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
yes, and Gordon told Trevor he was bisexual, and Trevor says, "Are you really bisexual or BS bisexual?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I don't think Alan was BS bisexual.
No,
Alan
Alan
liked,
was bisexual.
yeah,
Yeah.
Alan was bisexual.
Yeah.
So I think that perhaps perhaps could feed into the anger because she had no reason to think her husband was was anything other than a straight man because they had amazing sex. So
Yeah, I agree there. So we've spoken about many characters so far. Did any of them seem familiar to you?
I knew
Well,
these characters, you know. I don't know if it's because I'm Vinci. I don't know if it's because I'm a Vinci woman and I know of these marriages
yeah, but where
um,
we,
between gay men and straight women.
yeah.
I just felt I knew all of these people.
But Paula, do you
I
think
knew
this is
these
a
two
Saint Vincent
couples.
reality? I think this is a Caribbean
Oh no,
reality.
I'm saying that. I
Yeah.
no, I agree with that. I agree with that. But it's I just felt I don't know because I guess because in this the setting of the novel
Mm-hmm.
is Saint Vincent.
Mm-hmm.
Um I could because I we all Tony, you know, you and I both know
We know
these
them. We know
couples.
them. We know them.
We,
We know
we
them.
know them.
We know them.
So
Mm.
so
And we
yeah.
know the dynamics. We know the talk behind closed doors. We know the as we say susu susu
Mm.
and all the hush hush stuff. And it's a real dynamic in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and I would proffer in the Caribbean as well.
Mhm.
But Paula and I live here, so we
And
speak about the reality.
and
And the author is writing
even
a St. Vincent book.
even
Yeah.
beyond the Caribbean, because even in the developed world, even in the world where gay people are given proper legal rights now, there is still stigma and discrimination.
And the author
And there are
did mention that in the novel as well, when he
Yeah.
was drawing reference to certain parts in the book where people were saying, well, it's not just the stigma of hair too, there's stigma in Canada as well, so don't think it's just a Caribbean thing.
So, how do you feel about the fact that this novel tackles the status of gay men and the problem of HIV infection in one breath?
I was uncomfortable with that.
I agree.
Um, yeah, I'm wary of this idea that gay men are HIV vectors,
Right.
and I am worried that this novel might feed into that narrative. So it made me uncomfortable. It's something I really would like to speak to the author about, whether that crossed his mind and whether he had any concerns about it.
You see again, and I'm sharing your discomfort, in a deep sense as well. But again, I think the novel is dated in a time when that was the perception, and that is what has highly stigmatized the thing as well. Um, that it's HIV is a gay disease, is a gay man disease. I was surprised that knowing the author, I was surprised that he would make the relationship in such a stark way in the novel. And the stats, Paula, locally, that they're probably more heterosexual um, people walking around HIV infected than gay people, and so that was a level of discomfort for me as well. It was misleading. It was forcing you down an old path,
Mhm.
the old stigmatized path.
It's not an old path, you know.
It still
It's
exists, I
still very
suppose.
no,
Yeah,
Tony.
yeah.
It's very current.
Mm.
The decision, the recent decision we had where the two gentlemen challenged the Buggery law was it went against the two gentlemen who challenged the law. And if you read that decision, that judgment, it is heavily, heavily based on that perception that gay men are vectors, are HIV vectors, heavily based, shockingly so. So it's not dated. The perception is not dated at all.
No, I agree. I don't think it's dated. I mean, I would add though that the judgment may have been passed by somebody who is dated, but let's not go there. Let's not go there. Mm.
But yeah, just to agree that that was uncomfortable. Like the author's choice to be like, okay, well, it's a gay man, so he's gonna infect his wife with HIV. I feel like he could have dealt with the issue of the difficulties of being gay in Saint Vincent without that necessarily being a part of it. Um, Maybe it's because he wanted to, have the whole sh- the plot line where she's dying and so she writes a memoir, but that could have, you know, been avoided, I think.
And you're right.
It
It was
also
the
makes the story. It also makes the the problem of gay men being forced into marriage with women more stark, you know,
Mm,
because it is a problem. It is the stigma and discrimination pushes gay men into these marriages of convenience because I mean I suspect it's not a politically correct term, but you know when I was growing up we used to call that a beard.
right.
That a woman married to a to a
mm.
gay man
Mhm.
was his beard, you know, his claim to manhood. Um, and it is still a problem here. I don't know if maybe among young gay men. I don't. I have a friend who is gay, and he once said to me to my face, "If you see me doing that to a woman, stop me."
Mm,
Um, but I don't know if it's still a problem with younger gay men. My age, men my age, I know, and older,
mm.
I know it was a thing.
But the author did actually address that with the Joseph storyline, which I thought was actually quite well done. Um, do you guys remember the Joseph, his co-worker at the hospital who then
Yes,
eventually,
yes, I
right?
remember it.
So he did address that whole, should gay men really be doing this, you know, to a woman from the point of view of not just doing it for them because they should probably, be more open or whatever if they can, but just like why, should you actually be doing that to a woman?
No,
So, I mean,
that
it's
was
one
very
thing.
important. That was
Yeah, it's one thing if the woman is aware and she agrees. It's a totally different thing if, it's being done.
I
It's a deception.
no that I think that was the point of the novel in large part. I think one of the messages that the novel is telling us is that when you stigmatize, when you make it so difficult for gay men to live authentically, this is what you do.
Happens.
You
I
create
agree.
all these unintended consequences,
Yeah, and I
you
think that's the
know?
point. That was the
Yeah.
point of the novel.
Yeah.
Well, one of the main
Hmm.
pillars on which
Yeah,
the novel is
absolutely.
based. Yeah, yeah. But Francine, why would the I'm just being mischievous here. Why would a woman knowingly get
There's all
married to
kinds
a gay
of
man?
reasons.
Why?
Because maybe
What's well? I
I
guess
don't know.
there's
I don't
some.
know.
That sounds very transactional to me.
Yeah,
There's some
there
sort
are
of
lots of
you know.
transactional marriages, Tony. I mean, everybody isn't getting
Mm,
married because they're deeply in love and committed. Marriage
Mm.
is quite transactional, so it wouldn't surprise me if there's some women who would, for whatever benefits, who knows, they might get out of
Well,
it, who
I guess.
might do it.
But oh, you're forgetting that there's this narrative that you can change somebody from being gay. So a woman I can easily see
She
that.
could,
A woman could
that could,
think, I
right?
can change
I
him.
can, yeah, I can
Women,
change him.
first of all, there's a woman disease, eh?
Yeah,
I can change him
I
is
can
a
change
woman disease. I, not just about sexuality.
about everything.
About everything. It's a woman disease. We all need
Roger, you're a young
medicine
man. You
to
understanding all these
treat it.
dynamics. So it's
Not really. I mean, but then the novel did allude to like trying to change because was his name Theo, the
The
young
son
guy who was,
of
yeah, who was suspected
Austin's
of being,
son. Yeah,
and he was basically recommending therapy for Theo, if I remember correctly. Um,
yeah, but I don't think it was who was recommending it. Gordon?
wasn't it Austin?
I don't
Austin was
No,
know.
saying
no,
that
I
his
don't
no.
no.
think they were
Austin was fine.
recommending.
Austin
I,
was fine with his son
right. I
being
don't.
gay.
If any
But I
therapy
do
came up,
recall.
it wasn't for changing him. I think it was maybe more to help him to come to terms with, you know, I mean, therapy isn't always just about.
No, I remember what it was. It was
Uh,
Andre. Andre's father. That's a Canadian, Gordon's Canadian lover.
right. Yes, that was,
Andre's
yes, it was
father
Andre's
had
father that was
suggested
like, yeah.
that,
Yeah, it
yes,
was
that
that.
he should
Yeah.
go into therapy to
Yeah,
cure him of
to
being
cure him,
gay.
right? Yeah, that's who it was.
when you're
Yeah,
saying
that's right.
therapy, I mean, in some instances, it's a thing when you put the religious application to it. It's a thing where they believe that it can be exorcised. You know, it's you have to go and you need God, right? And you need to get this demon out of you. So you go, you get baptized, you get all the rituals, and it's like an exorcism, really. So that is deep rooted because the belief is that you cannot be born and have that preference. That's
Right.
just some demonic. That's the devil at work.
And something,
You know.
it's something I just can't wrap my head around. I have seen 4-year-old boys. I have seen little boys who are 4, and I could tell they were gay. So how in heaven's name do you think people aren't born that way? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either, Paula. Yeah.
I think there might be class considerations. I was wondering if you have any particular thoughts about the fact that the story is told from the perspective of educated middle class characters.
Well, the story is
Yeah.
definitely told from that perspective, but I
Hmm.
don't know if that bears any relevance to the way we accept or not accept is throughout the social strata. Um,
Don't you think it's easier though for an educated middle class person to navigate the society than
well,
They
if
have,
you're gay? If you're
yeah,
gay and working class, I can
they
see that
have,
is a double jeopardy.
right.
That's
it's a
You
double
double
have,
jeopardy.
jeopardy.
you have
It's a
more,
double
you
jeopardy.
have
Yeah,
more resources for sure.
yeah, you have more ways to hide.
You have more ways to hide.
Yes.
In most cases, you're highly educated, so you can, you can get a great job. If you need to go off island to pursue your, you know, business, you
And
can.
while you had spoken about, because people,
You can move in between and hide better. So yeah.
right, and while you people will identify you like that, they would do it behind closed doors, right? And so they won't confront you.
Hmm.
Whereas the people of the lower social status would be confronted with it. Those are the ones who are going to be stoned out of tongue, in other words, right?
Right.
And abused. Whereas the ones in the social strata, you just
People turn a blind eye.
well, they talk about it,
Right, but they
and
don't.
they make up a calypso or two about it, right?
Like the governor general's wife who beat the woman with her shoe.
Mm,
Hi, is that a true story? I had to ask y'all.
yeah.
Tony, do you know that, sir? I don't know about a governor general, but it may have been before my time.
I
May have
know
been
It,
before I came here.
it happened, right? I
I
got
know
the impression it
many
happened
who
like in
got beaten
the.
with shoe heels, right?
We all, Tony and I know somebody recently, a politician, not a governor general, who got beaten in the road by his
With
wife, but for, because he was found with a woman in the
Mm.
road.
So it happens.
Well, we are rich in theater. They have all kind of scandals, and uh,
Okay.
but to your question, Roger, about the aspiring middle class or middle class aspiring higher class. Yeah, the novel is full of that. Those were the characters in in the book. Um, Senior civil servant, advisor to the prime minister. You don't get more important than that. It had me looking forward to see if I could actually identify who Gordon was.
But
But on
but
the
he
other
didn't.
hand, you would think also what's interesting about that is that, like we said, they're able to, navigate it better. But when it comes out, they have so much more to lose also, right? So
I
it's
don't
a
know.
Yeah,
double-edged
I
sword.
think
I don't
they will
know.
also.
Yeah.
I think they will surf. They will surf that better than if you're working
Yeah,
Yeah.
class.
they tend to
If you're
fall on
working
their
class, that's
feet,
the end of your life.
Francine.
That's the end of your life. When you're
Francine,
middle
they tend
class,
to fall on their feet after Great Paula. Yeah.
and if
They,
you're talented enough, the world will celebrate you anyway. Think of Rex Nettleford. Think of how the Caribbean celebrates Rex Nettleford. And Rex was living in a time when there was a lot of intolerance, but Rex was so amazingly talented that everybody loved him. Even the most horrific homophobes loved him. So, yeah, if you're
Yeah.
We
middle
even saw
class, if you
glimpses of
have,
we saw glimpses of that with Alan, because even when Alan was laid up in the hospital, there was still a tremendous amount of respect for him, and there were people questioning Beth's actions after that. When I don't want to reveal too much, and was it Dr. Khan who basically said that she needs to reconsider? She's doing this, you know, off the fly. She needs to cool down and think it over. So I think there was still a lot of grace for Alan even after this entire thing blew up. And then you had the case of Will Gordon. He had options because he was educated and middle class, so he was able to travel and go on his escapades. Whereas Alan was a lot more carefree in the way he went about his life. So I think we got a good sort of comparison between Gordon, who went to some lengths to hide, and Alan, who tried something that that didn't make sense. And I I had to laugh when he said that women were showing up at is it Evesham? Is that how you pronounce Evesham? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes, yes,
Evesham. Mhm.
A tall one and a short one. But one of the other contrasts too, as you said, Rolji, that Alan was he was more, he was just doing his thing, is that it actually, for years, Gordon did not do anything. It was only when he met Trevor and Trinidad that things started, right? If I read the timeline correctly, there were years when he came back from Montreal that he was just the faithful husband, the great father, and that was that. He did nothing. Did I understand that correctly?
yes, yes.
Yeah.
That was how I read it as well. That he was celibate
Mhm.
for many, many years until he went and met Trevor.
Mhm.
And maybe the novel. I don't know if Nigel was doing that deliberately, because another part of the narrative about gay men is how promiscuous gay men
They
is.
are.
And but
True.
but Nigel addressed that in the novel. He said men have a hard time being faithful. So it's not a gay man thing, it's a man thing. um
And it took. I
and
kind of
because
objected
the
to that
sex
though.
is no, wait, let me just finish.
Mm,
Because the sex is between men, it's men having sex with men. It looks like there's more promiscuity, but
mm.
there isn't in reality more promiscuity. Men have a hard time having one partner. It's a man thing.
Yeah, I get that. And I think you're right. The thing looks more cute if it's same sex, right? Because already you are, as a straight person or as a person who um, belongs to a certain social conditioning, already you're having a hard time processing the same sex relationship, right? And then if you add layers of that on, where it's not just one partner but multiple, and it looks to that sort of person who has difficulty processing it, it looks far more acute, the promiscuity issue, than if it was a man who, and by and large, in these societies, men are expected to be that way, Paula. It's almost like if a man is not that way, well, he is, something's wrong with this guy. He's an anti-man, right? um,
One of the things I found interesting about all the myths and narratives around being gay is that the novel says gay people men who read are suspected of being gay.
Hmm.
I was like
I took offense to
flabbergasted
that.
by
That's,
that.
you
I
know,
I
guess
took
I'm
offense
only
to that. And it's the
attracted
first
to
time I heard that.
that is still true,
Is
unfortunately,
that true?
in the especially in the African American
God,
community.
my
There's this
goodness.
narrative that if boys are reading, that they are gay.
No, you see that kind of
Like,
profiling, I don't understand where
yeah,
that comes from. It's the
that it's
first time
true.
that that has been
That
introduced to
is
me.
yeah, that boys are supposed to be out playing sports and running after women. They're not supposed to be reading books. God forbid it's fantasy or science fiction, and they start cosplaying. You know, it's all over.
That's a new
But is that
concept
like a
to
Yeah.
me.
modern thing though?
Yes,
Because
I saw
okay,
something about that like last week on Threads. There was a whole discussion about it, and that was literally it. This guy was saying, you know, you guys, you're wondering why, because apparently there's this statistic now that Black American men are the enrollment rates and finishing rates in college of Black American men is just lower and lower as years go by. And someone was saying it's not surprising when there's so many fathers who won't let their boys read because they think it's gay. So yeah, still exists.
I'm still confused. Paul, is that something that is Saint Vincent dynamic at all? Honestly, I'm
I
just hearing
never
that for the
heard.
first time.
No, I never heard it either, Tony. I read it in the book, and when I read
Hmm.
it in the book, I was gobsmacked. I was like, "What? What?" Apparently, I'm only attracted to gay men then because I only like men who read. So,
No,
yeah,
I'm hearing this for the first time. I never knew that that
Yeah, no,
was a
I've
thing.
definitely
I never knew
I've
that was a
definitely
thing. I
heard it
mean,
before.
men in
I've
the
definitely
kitchen, yes, and even that now is kind of outdated thinking because everybody
that's
knows that men are better cooks than women, right? Francine
all
and
right.
Paula.
We're not gonna
well,
go down. We
I'm
don't
a
we don't have time.
fantastic cook. I
We
am
don't
an
have enough
amazing
time to
cook.
discuss
So,
that point, Tony.
Hmm.
Hmm.
but moving on to like other social issues, because this was sort of in the periphery. So apart from the main concern, the novel touched on other social problems in SVG. For example, the author mentioned Gordon's cousin Phil, whom Gordon thinks of as a wastrel, and Maureen's complaint that in SVG opportunities for entertainment and education are limited, and that life is sterile and lacking in possibilities for intellectual growth. Did you think these matters advanced the story?
I I thought the Phil. I just didn't see how the whole interaction between Gordon and Phil fit into this story. It seemed to me that Nigel was just throwing everything into this story that concerns him about Saint Vincent and the Grenadines, including the kitchen sink. Um, because I just didn't see how Phil fit in. Phil was the kitchen sink. Um, I don't. I agree with Maureen that opportunities for intellectual stimulation in St. Vincent are limited, and life can, if you are inclined to be intellectual, life here can feel sterile. I agree with that, but I don't know how it advanced the narrative. I believe it's a true statement. Well, it certainly it feels true to me. Let me be. It's a subjective thing for me, but I didn't see how it advanced the narrative.
Paula, you have put that over in a very diplomatic way. They're my thoughts exactly about the author throwing everything into this narrative novel, call it what you may, about how he felt or feels about issues in St. Vincent, right? And That was thrown in there to get that point across. I didn't see the connection. I couldn't see how that was advancing the underlying story. So I'm glad you expressed it in the way you did, and I didn't offer to answer it first because I may not have been so diplomatic. But you're right. This is a personal, highly personal touch that really didn't to me add anything to the story that he was trying to tell. You know.
Yeah, I was kind of confused as to what, you know, the whole point of it. And it really seemed like he was just really denigrating a certain sector of society. The way that it was written, I felt like the point he I don't know, it didn't come off as though he was trying to say, well, something needs to be done so that people don't end up like this. It just seemed like he was trying to say, oh my god, there's these really awful people who are just a drain on society, and I didn't really understand.
I really got it as an expression of anger, almost. You know, it's like this is something that pains him, angers him, and he just had to get it in
Mm.
there. You know, and that's how I saw that.
You know, Toni Morrison has this concept of the white gaze. It
Mm.
felt to me, it felt to me like a diasporic gaze, like someone looking out. I mean, someone who belongs to, well, not exactly. It's not a perfect a perfect comparison with Toni Morrison's concept of the white gaze, but it did feel to me like a gaze. It felt like a gaze of disapproval.
Mhm.
It felt like a gaze by someone in a more privileged position, looking down on someone who is less privileged and perhaps not considering all of the factors that could lead to these behaviors.
So it's
Yep.
That
context. It's
Exactly.
context, right? And what you mentioned, Paula, really, I mean, it's so prolific now because of social media, right? Where you see people in the diaspora being able to comment on just about everything, right? And a lot of that comes across where you having that gaze from outside, you're looking down on people who may not have or live in a society, bigger economy, greater resources, all that, and therefore gives you more opportunities, more avenues for expression of different things and so on. And you are almost saying that it is someone's fault or our fault why we are like that. We're stuck, you know. And that I agree. That's the sense I got to. It's from a privileged position. You're looking down and saying, "Hey, you guys are stuck. You guys have no opportunities for artistic expression, for intellectual expression, for this and that." And without the context, man, you know.
but I hasten to add that I have as little patience with the fills of this world as as Gordon had with Phil. But then I have to stop myself and say, but you're a privileged woman, you know, you're an educated middle class professional, and maybe I should temper my judgment. But I'm admitting that I have the same response to the fills of this world. They annoy the hell out of me.
I thought Gordon was actually quite decent to him, considering what I mean. I would have just laughed at him and left when he was coming up with all of his demands. But Gordon actually heard him out, answered, and took his time to explain to him why what he was asking for wasn't possible. Whereas I would have probably, like you, Paula, would have left him there a long time ago.
So, as a final question, do you think this novel can help change Caribbean attitudes towards the queer community? My answer
No,
would be maybe.
Yeah.
I'd say
I would say
maybe.
no.
I I
I would
don't
say
think
no.
so. I don't think that there was one
And I didn't think
clear.
that was the intention either, right? So
Right,
sorry,
yeah, we
Francie,
we
but
don't know what the
yeah.
intention is, but I don't think
Mm.
there was like one clear point that was clarified or made or explained enough for it to. I think, the because it used so many of the tropes surrounding homosexuality without explaining the context around those tropes or exposing them for what they were, that I'm not sure that this book would move the movement forward.
It
That
certainly
would
Don't
be
you
my
does.
think?
Go
Don't
ahead,
you
Paula.
think that this book makes a good statement about pushing gay men into these corners
That
where
is
they
the
marry
point I think the
women,
novel is
where they
about.
marry women?
Yeah.
I think it makes a strong case,
It
and I think it
absolutely
makes a
does.
persuasive case.
It highlights the closet nature of which, you know, gay men are forced to adopt because of the social perceptions on what Guinness is, right? And it uses the extremes of, well, Maureen's experience and her fate, and all that, right? But does it really change? So while it makes that point, I don't know if it's the same question. Is it going to change? Is it going to move the needle anyway in terms of having read the book and you have a certain mindset? Is it going to
I
appeal to
Don't
your?
all
cons-
conversations help to move the needle though?
true, true. But considering that we all agreed that these situations are situations that we're all aware of and everyone knows it happens, it's like he hasn't exposed anything new, right? So
Francine, you need to read that judgment. You need to read the judgment about
okay,
the
I will read the judgment.
yeah. No, you are thinking
Okay,
that
so
everybody is like
maybe
us.
okay, so maybe
No,
the
mm-mm.
question, right? So maybe the question shouldn't be whether it would change things in the Caribbean. Maybe will it change things in Saint Vincent? Because
Well,
the question was, will it
I
change
take
things
the
in the
point that
Caribbean, right?
these are conversations that you must have, right?
Mhm.
If you don't have the conversations, then nothing would change. So I
Right.
on that basis, yes, I see it. Is it one that will convert somebody immediately? You see, we are already, Paula, we're already at a different level of consciousness, you know. I mean, I'm not trying to sound as if
No,
we're,
I agree with
you
you.
know,
I agree with you. But what I'm saying is that the conversation helps. It might not, it won't change somebody's mind overnight,
mm,
but these things are incremental. I see a more progressive Caribbean now than the Caribbean I knew 10 years ago, than the Caribbean I knew 20 years ago.
yes, and only because
So,
these
and,
conversations
and,
are being
and it's
had.
because these conversations are happening.
Yeah, correct.
Noted.
I
Yeah.
think that was a beautiful way to end there, Paul. That was very, very, very good. So that is all that we have for our reflections today. The next time you see us, we'll be interviewing the author H. Nigel Thomas to find out a bit more about his inspiration for this and his process in writing this novel. Thank you for joining us. Have a lovely day.